Good morning, guys. Actually, good afternoon, since it's after lunch. Max Erdica, I'm a distinguished TME, part of the data center business unit.
Matthias Wessendorf, I'm a principal engineer, part of the same business unit.
Same team. We all work for Lucas Kratiger, but yes, that's the gist of it. So what we're going to talk about today, it's basically an infrastructure discussion, an architectural discussion. We're going to introduce this concept of this term that you may not have heard before, which is a Cisco Unified Fabric, or One Fabric. We'll clarify what we mean with One Fabric and why we did the One Fabric. We will go quickly through what are the main pillars or the functional components that build this One Fabric story. And then in the final part of the presentation, probably 15 minutes or 20, Matthias will give you a demo of one of the specific functionality that build this One Fabric story. Okay? So it will be around 35, 40 minutes if we're lucky. Otherwise, we'll see if we stay longer. They will kick us out. So what the idea behind One Fabric is derived by the fact that our customer base, we know, has always been split into at least two, actually three types of customer. The customer, talking about data center, customer that deploy the CI fabrics, customer that deploy standalone and XOS with VXLAN VPN, which has become, a sort of a de facto standard way of building data center fabric. And then there are customers that don't do any overlay and they build maybe large routed fabric. These are more massively scalable data center design. One Fabric is targeted to the first two type of customer, right? No matter if a customer has ACI or if a customer has VXLAN VPN, what One Fabric wants to offer is a unified experience that allows to provision, interconnect, connect application to this different type of fabric and managing them in a unified and seamless way, right? So the idea is, I have an ACI fabric, I have VXLAN VPN fabric, I want to interconnect them, I want to extend connectivity layer 2 and layer 3 between them. I don't need to worry that there are two different flavors that inside the fabric may work slightly differently, even if obviously you guys know that VXLAN is what we use in both flavors, right, to build the overlay. But there are some differences that are hidden, right, by the One Fabric experience. And so really the three main pillars that build this story are, okay, first, we need to allow an ACI fabric, which has always been perceived by customer like a closed system, right? I have an ACI fabric, I can only connect to another ACI fabric, or I can add another ACI leaf to an ACI fabric. We need to open up an ACI fabric and allow it to connect to a standard VXLAN VPN network. And so we are introducing the first component, which is and I have a slide where I'll talk a little bit more about that, which is called an ACI border gateway. The ACI border gateway is a standard VXLAN VPN border gateway, like we have already been supporting with an XOS for the last 7-8 years. I think we shipped VXLAN multi-site in 2017. Now we are bringing that functionality into ACI to basically be the hook that allows to extend standard VXLAN VPN connectivity between an ACI environment or an ACI domain and a VXLAN VPN domain. So that's the first building block. The second building block, since, as you may know, in ACI, an ACI fabric, by definition, is an identity-based fabric. It has a policy angle, right? There are EPGs, endpoint group, or ESG, that are by design part of an ACI fabric. When you want to establish connectivity between two endpoints, you need to map them to two security groups and create a contract. Now, you can simplify that application of policy with different features that we have, but there is a policy angle in ACI from ground zero, from its inception. In a VXLAN VPN fabric, a VXLAN VPN fabric has always been around connectivity, layer 2 or layer 3. But the policy was never considered as an important functional component. Of course, customers have continued to do traditional VLAN ACL, layer 3 access control list, redirection to service node using bridging or routing, right? So a traditional network way of integrating firewalls, for example, but there was never a security angle associated to a VXLAN VPN fabric. And so what we're bringing, which is essentially the main focus also the rest of this presentation, is we're introducing this concept of security groups and contracts, if you want to call it the ACI way or security group ACL, that can be applied between this security group in VXLAN VPN to allow or deny traffic, okay? And the moment we do that, now the two type of fabric becomes equal class citizens. So the use cases that I initially could do only on an ACI fabric, now I can extend it to a VXLAN VPN fabric. So it's not only the connectivity, the extension of connectivity through the border gateways, but it's also an extension of policy, the creation of a unified policy domain end-to-end between this heterogeneous fabric. And the third component of the solution, which is arguably the more important, is the Nexus Dashboard that will need to make the experience from a user perspective seamless, right? We want to hide the fact that under the hood, we have fabrics that have different nature. I want to be able, from the Nexus Dashboard, to have a seamless way to provision connectivity between these fabrics and policies between groups, security groups that are creating these two fabrics, without having to worry of what are the nuts and bolts of my different fabric types. And so 1, 2, 3, these are the three components that build essentially the one fabric story.
Yeah, I think the very important part really is for us the policy, to make this policy extendable across it and have it as a kind of a unified, so that you describe what you want it to do and the system takes care if it is a mix of EVPN and ACI fabrics or only EVPN fabrics or only ACI fabrics, that is translated in the right way for this interconnect, right? This is one of the main pillars here as well, what we are going to do with the Nexus Dashboard.
Okay. If you have any question, you guys, can interrupt at any. Yes, please.
So in terms of the translation between the ACI and XOS, is there like, parity? So you've mentioned EPGs, ESGs, contracts in the ACI, policy in the XOS. So I guess you are sort of like somehow utilizing the ACLs, like you've mentioned. So how is the parity between those two environments?
So we'll cover a little bit more. We'll talk a little bit more. The secure group implementation in a VXLAN VPN fabric is very similar to the ESG implementation in ACI. Okay.
Right.
So in terms of how the policy information is carried across, we'll clarify. We actually have a control plane also in VXLAN VPN that allows to carry the policy. But from a normalization perspective, I guess where you're going is that when you bring an ACI fabric together with a VXLAN VPN, you may have some conflicting resource ID like VXLAN IDs or groups conflict, right? We are going to build a translation and namespace normalization translation function on the ACI border gateway so that the ACI border gateway will see a VXLAN VPN domain, right, in a certain way, which could be different from the internal resources associated to this object, right, in ACI, and it will translate to ensure that if I have an L2 VNI, to make an example, a VXLAN ID, in the domain, in a VXLAN VPN domain space, that needs to mean the same thing in ACI, but they have two different values, the translation will ensure that they can be actually functionally operate as a single object, even if they have assigned different resources, because we have different brains, different controllers that assign these resources.
And this ACI, so that could be multi-port, multi-site, or is it like, what is it?
The ACI, the border gateway in the first implementation, which is 6.1 coming now, this is just a time to market, right? In the first release, the ACI can only be a single fabric, but could be multi-pod. I could have multiple pod under the single epic domain, let's say. But for sure, we want to be able to support multiple independent fabric if you have customer with independent fabrics, or even customer that are deployed ACI multi-site, which is, different fabric manages a single multi-site domain, right? We will be able to interconnect them, okay? And these basically very quick, because the rest of the presentation is focused on the GPO, right? This is really the slide that shows you that essentially the key component that allows to interconnect this ACI domain to a VXLAN VPN domain is the border gateway, right? And that border gateway function essentially the same way as a standard, fully standard VXLAN VPN border gateway that works exactly like the border gateway, the NXOS border gateway that we've been shipping with VXLAN VPN to build multi-site for 7-8 years, okay? And so the idea is through that insertion or injection, if you want, of the border gateway nodes in an ACI fabric, I will be able to extend connectivity, layer 2, layer 3, and policy across the two domains, okay? And that's the critical function. But as I said, it's not only connectivity, we want to also ensure that the use cases the customer can enable are the same independently from the type of fabrics. And so we need to ensure that VXLAN VPN supports the same security policy or the same security construct that already we have in ACI from the beginning, right? And this is where GPO comes to rescue. And as we said, in terms of implementation, you can consider that the GPO implementation is similar to what we do with ESG in ACI more than EPG. As you know, the EPGs are mapped to a bridge domain, which basically, especially for customers that have a network-centric environment, means they need to create a lot of contracts because they need to create a lot of EPGs if you have different network/VLANs. The concept of ESG allows you to classify endpoints that are part of a VRF independently from the specific network that they're part of. So it's a much more flexible way of classifying endpoints or external prefixes as part of a secure group, right? And once I've done this classification, then I use the same construct of contract, or as I said, SGA, secure group ACL, that allows to determine how these different groups can communicate with each other. We will have also, customer will have the choice of how to configure the VRF. So we will have two modes, which are, you can consider them a whitelist or blacklist. I don't know if it's politically correct to say, but that's how we know. We know that ACI is a whitelist model, which means two different groups in ACI do not talk to each other unless you create a contract that allows them to talk, right? Zero trust security, if you want. But we have also, we know that we have customers that they would like to start with a blacklist model where everything is allowed, even if I create different groups, and then I just deny specific flows between these groups, right? And so the VRF in VXLAN VPN could be configured in these two modes. Once I enforce, which means I enable the GPO feature, I can say it's a deny all default model, which means two groups need to have a specific contract to communicate, or it's a permit all default mode, which means everybody talks to everybody else unless I create a contract that says deny SSH or something like that. Okay, so
yeah, I mean, one thing which is super crucial to this is that from the beginning, we started to decouple the forwarding from the policy, right? Because in ACI, the forwarding and the policy is coupled. EPG is my endpoint group where I created the contract, right? And now what Max was saying is really the ESGs or the GPO is across the forwarding, just defining the policy, carrying the identity through the network and react on this one. So it can go beyond the forwarding boundaries, right? So it makes it easier. So you create one HTTP server, one DB server group, for example, which is then valid across all my networks, right? In the same VRF. So where the limit is the VRF. That makes it much more flexible and keeps the policy also smaller.
So can I have a question?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Just a couple. So and sorry if I'm too much ahead, but the management. Mm-hmm. So are you saying that you're basically locking out anyone to make any local changes in the ACI and an XOS, or like, you know, let's say I want to create a policy, mm-hmm. and then someone will go to the ACI fabric and create like, you know, something like independently. Like, is that something you're allowing and it's going to get imported into the?
Well, you can always go and configure a policy independently to Epic, right? But the idea of delivering the third component of the solution, which is the single point of management, is that you want to create that policy in a unified way, right? You want to create it on the Nexus Dashboard platform, and then that policy applies to your multi-domain environment.
So it's more of a like orchestrator, right?
It's a sort of orchestrator function. In ACI multi-site, we have NDO that allows you to do that. Yeah. Here, we are going to remove on the Nexus Dashboard the differentiation between the different services, right? You won't see anymore NDO, NDI, and DFC. There will be functions. One function that we're building is to basically the ND will interact with Epic, will interact with the VXLAN VPN fabric to ensure that you provision and you do also the two operation end to end, right? Independently from the type of fabric.
Okay.
Right?
And then the second one about the gateways.
Yeah.
So the border gateways, can they be the IP and ISN nodes, or?
The border gateway, they need to be, in ACI, they need to be ACI nodes. Right, so they need to be, they run ACI code,
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right.
They're not IPNIs.
They're not, no. They are connected to the IPN, or you will be able to connect it directly with direct link with the NXOS border gateway. But they are ACI node. In addition to the spine, leaf, and remote leaf roles that we have in ACI, there is a fourth role which is called the border gateway. Okay, which initially needs to be dedicated for that function. Eventually, we'll be able to do also the border leaf, right? And so we are going to expand the capability because we don't want customer to buy 2 pieces of hardware just to do one thing, right?
Yeah, I was about to say, like,
yeah,
it's going to be like basically like a 2 ports from pair.
Exactly. No, it would be silly, right? So at least the border leaf, any layer 3 function like border leaf, border gateway, because one is for north-south, one is for east-west, will be supported on the same boxes, right?
And I might also, this is then streamlining the general design, because in EVPN, we have today the border gateway functionality for multi-site. In ACI, the spines are doing that, right? And if we interconnect them, we move for ACI to that interconnection also to the border gateway concept, right? So that's the same. That's not the interaction then with the spine, it's interaction with the border gateway, which is a kind of like leaf attach, right?
Yeah. Back to the GPO, right? In terms of provisioning and management of the configuration of GPO, right? Obviously, you can always do. You guys know that the VXLAN VPN does not mandate to have a controller, like for example ACI does with Epic, right? So we offer, of course, NDFC as a way to manage also the configuration of secure group on VXLAN VPN, and this is what Matthias will cover in the next, in the last 15 minutes of the presentation. But you can always have your own automation. The customer can have their own automation. They can even do CLI, even if I would argue that configuring GPO through CLI could be a bit painful, right? So you need a unified tool that could be a built-in automation in-house, or what we give you, which is NDFC, or basically ND, a functionality on ND, which is equivalent to NDFC, okay? Now, this concept of secure group obviously is not new, right? It's actually the third, we have at least 3 examples, right? One was SGT that came, with Catalyst Escape. We have been 15 years probably that we have SGTs. The second one is the ACI implementation of secure group, right? Now, both of them, what we differentiate actually the GPO approach to these two is the fact that one is following a standard, right? So as you see here, we have actually 2 standards, 2 RFC, 2 draft that have been combined to a single one. One draft covers the data plane aspect, which is what we do with SGT and ACI as well. So the fact that we carry a group identifier, a secure group identifier in the VXLAN header of the packet, right? So you classify an endpoint, and then that classification decision is carried along the network, right, with the data packet. But what we added a control plane aspect that allows to distribute not only reachability information, that's what EVPN does by design, but in addition to the reachability information, it communicates secure group information. So I classify you as part of group 1. When you are discovered connected to a leaf, EVPN communicates not only where you are, what is your MAC, what is your IP, but also which group you belong to, right? And this is a big differentiation because with SGT and partially also with ACI, the policy can only be applied at the egress of the network. Why? Because at the ingress, normally I don't know which group my destination I want to talk to belongs to, because nobody told me, okay? And so I need to send a packet, think about a multi-site deployment, all the way to the destination site at the egress leaf, and maybe because I want to drop it, right? Or if I want to insert a service chain, I need to send all the packet to the destination leaf and then maybe redirect to a service chain at that point. Having the capability of communicating this secure group information ensure that every leaf where a given BRF is deployed always knows not only where the destination is connected that I want to talk to, but also which group it belongs to. So I know the source group because it's locally connected to me. I know the destination group because the control plane told me. I can apply the policy in an optimized way in the ingress leaf, right? So as soon as possible, which means if I need to drop the packet, I drop it at the ingress leaf, right? If I need to redirect, I redirect from the ingress leaf. And this shows you how it works, which is, nothing magic. We are leveraging the control plane that it's already available in a VXLAN VPN fabric, which is MPBGP VPN, when an endpoint is learned as directly connected to a leaf, a control plane message, a type 2, EVPN type 2, or an EVPN type 5 if it's an external prefix, is going to be propagated inside the fabric, and it carries an additional extended community, which is called the group policy ID extended community, that gives me the information which group that specific endpoint belongs to, right? The receiving leaf uses that information to add in its table the fact that VM1 is connected to leaf 1 and belongs to the group 100 in this example, right? In the opposite direction happens the same thing. I communicate the fact that VM2 is learned behind leaf 4 and it belongs to group 200. And leaf 1 add that information in its EVPN table and then in the hardware forwarding table. At that point, if I apply a contract between 100 and 200, that contract can be applied in the ingress leaf, right? As soon as VM1 sends the packet to its default gateway or to its switch where it's directly connected, if it's a layer 2 flow, I'm able to basically drop or redirect or permit the traffic right there. And I don't need to wait to get to the destination leaf. So this is from a forwarding perspective. This is from a service insertion perspective, right? Because we can obviously, as part of the contract, apply the rule that is not only permit and deny, but also redirect to a firewall, load balancer, chain, whatever we have been supporting with PBR in ACI for a long time. I don't know if you have something to add to the point. If not, I want to close this and then give him the time to show you some of this from an NDFC perspective. The two use cases for this, for VXLAN GPO are, and here is the part where I want to be a little bit careful, right? People say, oh, microsegmentation. Microsegmentation is a word that means many things to many different people. We know that apply very granular policies is not easy for network guys, especially because they have no idea how the different components of the application usually works, right? Or interact with each other. So I want to talk more as a GPO giving you the capability of creating security zones, giving a better, more scalable way and simpler way to create access control list, right? Instead of having this IP needs to talk to this IP, I can actually group endpoints independently from what their IP is in specific groups. I can have two endpoints in the same subnet being part of two different security groups because I don't want them to talk to each other, or I want them to talk to each other only with a specific policy, okay? So instead of having to configure a VLAN ACL if I'm in the same subnet, a routed ACL if I'm in different subnet, I use a consistent method of classifying endpoints to group and then apply a policy between them, right? So it's a more advanced, more flexible, simpler way to create security rules between endpoints, right? And one typical example I could think is that, and the network guy usually doesn't know how the components of an application interact with each other, but surely knows or can get the information of what are the components of the application. So you could take the IP of all the servers that build the application and put them part of a specific group. At that point, you have isolated, you didn't break anything in the application because everybody can communicate with each other, but their application is isolated from the rest of the network, for the rest of the application or the rest of the groups, right? So
you don't have the VMM integration you have with the ACI, right?
We don't have it today, but obviously we need to have it because the example I gave you where I have two endpoints in the same subnet, which means the same port group, and I don't want them to talk to each other, we need to basically push the concept of private VLAN, right, to the hypervisor so that we force the traffic, and proxy ARP also, we force the traffic to go to the leaf, we apply the policy, right, and we send it back down. So definitely, even if you are in the same subnet, we cannot allow that communication to happen at the virtual switch level, otherwise we will break the isolation. So
because in the ACI you can do it like based on the host names, right? And
you can also
the virtual machine.
Yep.
So I guess we need to differentiate
two different things. Yeah, go ahead.
Max is talking from the enforcement,
right,
and you're talking from the classification.
From the classification.
The classification you're going to see in the demo what we can do today.
Okay, okay, sorry.
So there's some things, right? So because for what he was describing is really how do I make sure these cannot talk even if they are on the same VC?
Yeah, like
right, something like this. We
group cannot control the ARP down there.
Yeah.
But private VLAN will ensure that the ARP point me always to the leaf where I can apply the policy,
Right. Okay.
even if you are in the same
Okay,
place.
cool.
The second use case, which I already mentioned it, which is probably the one that we will see a lot, is I created these security zones, and now instead of applying contract between them, I say my policy is to redirect to a firewall because I want that firewall to be really the policy enforcement point between these different groups, right? And we have a lot of customers that have done this deployment model in ACI, and I expect to see the same in VXLAN VPN for sure.
I mean, this is going to give us the flexibilities to, for example, say like, hey, I redirect only application network traffic towards the firewall, and whatever is my backup traffic, I don't want to pump it to the firewall, right? I directly let it send to the backup servers, and that's it, right? That are then capabilities we have where you can look more granular into these and get rid of this kind of, how I often call it, middle box problem with having bigger and bigger firewalls because you send traffic so you not even can inspect, right?
Okay. Yeah.
What does setup look like for this from either a greenfield, like brand new data center, brand new applications, versus someone that's already got Fabric deployed and kind of wants to manage it from this going forward?
So I think the migration process there is super similar to what you would do if you start with an application-centric approach in ACI and go to a more network-centric approach in ACI and go to the application-centric approach. You could the one thing is it's a software upgrade on the switches, right? That they understand what GPO is to have the functionality on the ND, and then you can run, of course, your system like you want. So, and if there's already something defined, you can enable secure group tags, but that will do nothing before you tell the box, let's put this verb into enforce mode or not. If you don't do anything, it will function as it is, right? Because there are those things. And then you can either start to say like, hey, whatever gets newly added to the fabric, I'm going to enable it, right? Or you start to build up groups for the existing ones and start with the blacklisting model, like Mac was saying, that you have like, hey, I can implement it, but there is nothing that it's going to break something that's happening, right? So that you can have a very phased approach to this.
Okay.
And a couple additional comments. There is obviously an hardware dependency in the sense that this secure group functionality requires at least FX. Now, as of today, which is NXOS 10.4.3, we support FX3 models and newer. We're going to extend to FX and FX2, right? Which is pretty much every customer, because EX are kind of fading away. So it's not, but there is that angle. The other comment is if you have different fabrics, we also support having a mixed environment where maybe you migrate, you start deploying GPO in Fabric 1, becomes policy aware. Fabric 2 is still policy unaware. We will give you a way to basically classify the traffic from Fabric 2 at the entrance of the policy-aware domain so that you can already start applying some macro policy, if you want, until you basically propagate your policy awareness end-to-end in your infrastructure. Right? So there are different migration strategies to introduce that in Greenfield environment. If you start from scratch, it's easy. But Greenfield is only on slides. We learned that it doesn't exist in reality. So you have 15 minutes more or less to do the demo. So sit there.
While I bring it up, any more questions on
if you have
what we have?
I would have like one theoretical one.
Yeah.
So VXLAN GPUs are supported by Juniper now as well.
Mm-hmm.
So theoretically,
they could interact.
they could. Okay.
It's like the same. I answer the same way. The border gateway function also is supported by Arista, is supported by Juniper. There is a standard, right? And so
it's like BGP or anything.
It's BGP, but it's also the VIP versus PIP mode. So depending on the interpretation of the standard, it should work. Now it's not something that we're going to validate internally for obvious reason, but we follow the standard.
I was just curious, like theoretically,
yeah, absolutely. It should interact the same way. The ACI border gateway should allow you to connect to a VXLAN VPN fabric, which is not Cisco, right? It's a standard border gateway that does VXLAN VPN. Okay.
And am I right in saying you'd still need APIX if you wanted to run VXLAN VPN network in this kind of mode?
You need EPIC for the ACI fabric, right? Because ACI does not exist without EPIC.
Yeah,
right?
but if you didn't have ACI, you just had NXOS.
No, then you don't need EPIC. It's just you need Nexus Dashboard if you want a management point, and it will show you how to do GPO, or also VXLAN multi-site with border gateway. Can all be provisioned from ND, or you can do it manually or through automation.
Automation is a
Right.
principle.
There is no Epic, there is no controller.
Sounds good. It's just I understood that you'd need maybe an APIC because one of the border gateway would be running in ACI mode. That's what you mentioned.
The border gateway in ACI mode is only if you have an ACI fabric.
Okay, great.
Okay, all the other are already an XOS border gateway, and they don't require any.
But you see some customers maybe not buying ACI if this is available.
Well, I don't think I see customer not buying. Sorry, I think I pushed the button by mistake. Not buying ACI. I think the use cases for the border gateway are there may be customer they want to they have ACI and they want to continue their journey with VXLAN VPN, and they want a way to migrate from ACI to VXLAN VPN, or vice versa, because I heard customers that have VXLAN VPN, they want to go ACI.
Yep.
Or what I think will be more common is we have customers that run both type of fabrics already today, and they may want to start interconnecting them instead of managing them as independent layer 3 island, right? Have a capability of using VXLAN between them. We give that capability now. We open up that possibility that was not there until, actually it's not there yet because it's coming 6.1, which is end of June probably, but it will be there soon. Okay. Matze, the floor is yours.
So a quick overview, just showing you the topology, super easy. It's an EVPN fabric, FX3 switches, GX switches in. So from this topology, we can start to get the view of this fabric. Of course, we see, for example, which VRFs are deployed, and we see in which security mode they are, because this fabric is SGT enabled, right? So this is where you run the GPO. You good? Okay.
I can go either way.
Maybe you want to move a little corner like this, yeah.
By this way.
Eventually the stream will catch up here too.
Okay. So there we see that one. We see which networks are deployed. We can see also on the networks which VLANs they are using, right? And now, of course, we don't display the GPO here because the GPO is not tied to a network, right? That's the one thing. Then also, we have the security overview. In the security overview, there is really where I define the secure groups, right? Where I define the secure groups and I put in what are the matching parameters for an endpoint, for a network, for a route to be classified into this, right? This is the one thing. If we look, for example, into this security group, we see we have the capabilities of IP selectors, where we can put in IP addresses of end systems, directly putting them in, or what I used here, I used a whole network, a whole IP network, right? So as NDFC knows which networks are there under that VRF, I can just select them and say like, hey, whatever is part of this network, of this subnet defined in this network is classified as SG 10,004, right? And from there, the next step is if I have all of these groups, then I can start to have so-called associations. Where so like, hey, I have a destination and a source group, and I want to have a contract between them to make traffic flow between them, because that VRF, the VRF warriors, is in enforced mode, right? So there's a whitelisting model. There's no way of having traffic flowing when something is ongoing. If we look at this contract, for example, you see that these contract is applied. It's in bidirectional communication, right? We look at the protocol ICMP v4, v6, HTTP v4, HTTPS v6, and this then gives you the translation to the match one, and we do a permit lock so that you see counters up going when certain things are hit, right, on the system itself. The contracts are defined that are used for the associations between the groups, right? We quickly can see, get the overview of what are the rules that are enforced by this contract and which combination of SGTs are using this, and is this already deployed? So is this in use? That I'm not going to change something if it is deployed, because then potentially when I delete it, I know, oh, it is maybe somebody used it, but then you can follow like the ways of how to undeploy certain things like this. The protocol definition, we ship a bunch of definitions up front, but also you can add your own here. If you say like, hey, I want a name for a well-known application I'm often using, this is a port, this is like it's TCP or it's ICMP, also something else in there, so you get these. We provide also the kind of the monitoring to give you an idea how how many packets are traversing these rules for permit as well as then for the denies. And we always show when you resync, when we let NDFC grab the latest information back, we show you the delta between the last point. So you see, is it increasing? And when they're starting to get large numbers, that it's not on you to compare what was this before and after, because it's purely hits, right? So this is something just to give you some capabilities there. Also, coming to the point that was discussed with the VMM. So we have the capabilities today with NDFC to talk to a vCenter, and it's a read-only, and correlate the LLDP information of the vCenter with the LLDP information of the fabric to understand where are my my ESXi hosts attached, which VMs are living on this ESXi host in which port groups. Right, so and then I can start to visualize them. That's something I'm seeing in this virtual infrastructure, where see which VM with which IP addresses in which VLAN, which is corresponding to which network and which verve on which switch interface is attached. And if this VM belongs to a secure group, I also can see the security group. And now coming to the point with the upcoming release, I'm able to set on the discovered VM, I can set an SGT group, which is then potentially different from what was there before. Right? So
is the same thing like it is in the ACI? So that's actually answering my question. So in the ACI world, the VMM integration, so every time I created EPG, it got propagated into the vCenter. So in the vCenter, I could assign the VM to particular EPG as a port group.
Right, but this is without pushing anything to the vCenter.
Yeah, so it's just like doing read-only.
Correct. And this thing then takes the definition that are reported by vCenter, like which IP addresses, which network, and is using them as a selector.
Oh, okay. But the VM needs to be statically assigned to a particular port group. Like
yes.
you can't change it.
No,
you would probably need like Terraform or something to actually automate this.
I mean, that's exactly going into the direction what Max was saying, right? That we are looking into to get this way of also then using these, pushing the configuration with that we can use proxy R, private VLANs, and removing the hurdle of, hey, you need to do this manually over your Terraform, right? So that you get more of these integrations there, right? I mean, this is really neat because you quickly can see which VMs are there. You can filter, you can move them around, and really see what's happening. Also, especially for the visualization part, there is a so-called endpoint locator on NDFC, which brings up a BGP client, which is peering with the spines of the EVPN fabric in reading all the BGP updates, extracting the endpoint information, and is building a database on NDFC, which gives you where is the endpoint learned, what are the IP addresses, which switch, which network, which interface is this learned on. And then we started to put here, as the beauty of having the SGT information in the control plane, we put that information here in as well. So you can see here with the life of an endpoint to which SGT it belongs as well, which makes then troubleshooting super easy because this is live data from the fabric. Whenever an endpoint is brought up or changed, like assigning it to an SGT, it's a BGP update. NDFC sees it and is computing it and is visualizing it. Right. This is also the capabilities you get for these functionalities to see, okay, what can I do? How can I do? The same for the generic VMM integration. These VMM integration, for example, is across all fabrics. This is just focusing on where the vCenter is assigned to this NDFC. I read all VMs and show everything I know. Whereas the one we saw in the fabric overview is specific to the VMs that are really attached to this fabric.
Why is it like each of these VMs is attached to two security groups with the same name?
So it's multiple because it had multiple IP addresses.
Oh, okay, so that's one for the IPv4 and
one's for IPv6, if that's a second one, because we need, of course, IPv4, IPv6. We need to make sure they can be in different endpoint groups, right? So that's really the beauty. This is a generic overview and of the VMM, and the specific one to the fabric you get on the fabric view, right? So that you quickly can see these are the VMs that are really attached to the fabric and not just a dump of the vCenter, which may be attached to multiple fabrics, may manage an out-of-band network where ESXi hosts are attached and so on.
So can I just go one more time? So if I want to assign that VM to a particular security group, I need to go into the vCenter and assign it to the port group. No.
So what you do is,
because I have multiple VMs on a single physical port, right?
yes. So what you do is, for example, you deploy an app server, or a DB server. You deploy a DB server. The DB server gets an IP address by your management system and is deployed and able to talk to the fabric because there is a network there.
And that's how I link it to the security.
And then we get that information and we do use the IP, for example, as a selector, meaning when the packet of that DB server hits the leaf, it knows this has this SGT because this IP I was told has this SGT.
So what other selectors I can use than the IP address?
So you can do VLAN.
Okay.
You can use of course VRF. You can use it based on the information from the VMM, which is then the IP one, and you can use the interface.
Can I use the MAC address of that?
So MAC address is today no. I mean the question is if you want to do like a blacklisting. I think in EVPN the black hole routes are a little better solution than that, right? Because also the stuff all needs to be routed, right? So it will be translated to an IP later on, nevertheless.
Because when I'm deploying something on a scale, I'm using a DHCP. I'm not deploying VMs with a static IP addresses. I'm deploying them dynamically.
Correct. Yeah. So if you deploy them dynamically, you could, for example, update NDFC via an API with that information when it comes up. Right. Or saying hey, everything out of that network because it could be a specific range.